Hello there, Flip here, and today quite a different video to what I usually do, but I really just want to open up a more honest discussion about the Gacha community and all the BS I've seen from it over a few months, coming from the perspective of someone who primarily plays Hoyoverse games, and how I feel like the tribalism and straight up lies are ruining people's experiences with these games, as well as steering them away from something they may enjoy, and how a lot of creators in the space are using you and keeping you angry at nothing and nobodies, whilst they benefit from all the engagement and attention. So I'm going to be debunking a lot of the misinformation I've seen over the past few months, and as a quote-unquote Hoyoshill, try to give a different perspective to what is commonly called bad in this community, as this Gacha tribalism helps no one at all really, despite what a lot of the people forming and benefiting from this engagement may tell you. And I feel like as consumers of both Gacha content and the games itself, we deserve just better content in our spaces, as well as not being lied to in order to fuel a stupid fucking Gacha war, where all the sides are angry at each other for no real reason. But before we do that, as always, channel members, thank you for your support, it does mean the world to me. I love you all, and with that out of the way, let's begin. So to give some brief background, I'm mostly going to be highlighting the discourse around the mainstream Gacha games, being Genshin Impact of course, Star Rail, Wuthering Waves, and ZZZ, because if you spent any time interacting with these communities either in YouTube or the hellhole that is Twitter, I wouldn't be surprised if you see the constant arguments and toxicity that plagues the space. Genshin has been around for the longest, in which it's had its fair share of extremely toxic discourse over its years, but ever since the release of Wuthering Waves, as well as Natlan, I feel like it's been taken to a whole other level. And no, even though I'm mostly going to be defending Hoyoverse games in this video, the Hoyoverse communities are not at all innocent either. It is most definitely a problem on all sides, with the Karta Thea discourse before a gameplay came out, as well as whenever Hoyoverse players brigade the Wuwa livestreams, which I hope we can all agree is bad and childish. I'm just able to resonate more with the extremely negative sides of the Hoyoverse discourse more because I play Hoyoverse games. Now, before Wuthering Waves even released, there is really no way to know who started attacking who first, because as both Wuwa and Genshin were open world Gacha games, with Wuthering Waves taking heavy inspiration from Genshin, there was of course going to be comparisons made in which both sides of course were bickering about whose game is better, and the Wuwa team even fed into this themselves by seemingly mocking Genshin's exploration. Couple that in with Wuwa's, to put it lightly, rocky launch, and that just laid the groundwork for the communities to start bickering. This is also where the conspiracy theory of Hoyoverse paying its creators to not play Wuwa came from, even though that was quickly proven untrue as a lot of Genshin creators went to play Wuwa. And don't worry, I'll touch more on that later. Also in this video I may use generalizing terms like Hoyoverse community or Wuwa community, in which I'm obviously not trying to encapsulate all players in the space, it's just the easiest thing to say. So if you're not a part of what I'm referencing, don't worry, I'm not talking about you. Now at first there was just comparisons from both sides of the games talking about which aspects of each they thought the games did better, but then there have been two creators in particular that have pretty much championed hatred towards Hoyoverse as a way to shield criticisms from Wuthering Waves, those creators being Saint Tontis and Glaive Kyo. The bulk of both of these creators' channels is just being overly critical of Hoyoverse games and its players, as a way to give criticism about the games they once loved, as it may make the games better, and I'm sorry but that's complete bullshit. The first thing I want to highlight is that both Saint and Glaive don't even play the game they use as their main punching bag, Genshin, or at least they haven't played the game seriously for a long time, and don't take my word for it, here's Saint Tontis showcasing his supposed account, where he hadn't touched the game in a while.
Last time I played was in May of 2024.
Here is also Saint saying that he plays the game usually for 1 to 2 hours a month.
So, I guess just to talk a little bit about myself and Genshin Impact, yeah, I mean, I'm playing this game maybe, what is it, 2 hours a month? Maybe 1 hour a month, something like that, a bit less.
Sure.
Now for Glaive Kyo, my proof for him not really playing the game is going to come from the fact that all his gameplay is seemingly just stolen from other channels. Searching one of the UIDs in one of these videos leads me to this channel, where the creator isn't credited in the video, and also the statement he made here.
And let's also talk about how painful it is to play your game daily. Genshin, your dailies take so long compared to other games, it's insane. In HSR, you can just spend your energy and be done with your dailies. In Zone Zero, you can just scratch a card, go coffee, spend your energy, and then be done with your dailies. In Wuthering Waves, you can also do the same thing. So why can't you do the same thing, Genshin? God, why does it have to be commission quests? 4 of them!
Now, if you haven't played Genshin in a while, what Glaive said may make perfect sense, but to anyone who's played Genshin in the past 2 years, ever since 4.1, Hoyoverse has added a system that gives you an alternative way to get your daily rewards called encounter points, in which you can just ignore the daily commissions by exploring the open world and doing events, and that would give you all your daily rewards. And then in 4.8, they made the system even better, where even after getting all your daily rewards, encounter points will continue to stack up if you do tasks that reward them, and you're able to use these spare encounter points instantly by spending resin. So if you have a spare weekend and want to grind Genshin, you'll get tons of encounter points, and if you want to log in and use resin and log out, that will get everything done for you in the day. Even making condensed resin counts, so you can get your dailies done in under like 30 seconds in Genshin. The system Glaive is complaining about has been implemented and fixed for almost 2 years now, so Glaive either just lied to his audience to make this joke or hasn't touched the game in a while to know that the commission system is significantly better than either of the Hoyoverse games right now. And that leads me to what I'm going to say next, in which you can't criticize content or mechanics you haven't played, because you won't be able to assess its faults accurately to give any meaningful criticisms. And hell, let's look at Glaive's livestream titled Hate Watching the 5.6 livestream. Can we be honest with ourselves and acknowledge that these creators aren't going in with an open mind? They aren't even going in to see if they're going to play the content, they're just going to reach for anything that looks bad and call it the worst thing they've ever seen, to appeal to their confirmation bias that Genshin is a terrible game that does nothing right.
Oh my god, it's like being able to resurrect an artifact
Oh,
from the
you
grave.
see that? You see that? You see that? Now shut the fuck up! It got prioritized, it still went to double defense! This game could fucking die! Fuck this game! Fuck this game!
And the funniest thing with both Glaive and Saint's videos and live streams is that they constantly get things wrong, because a live stream isn't the full picture of an update. Obviously, Saint Tontus made a video reacting to Glaive's video calling 5.4 a filler patch and explaining how Genshin is making them worse over time, so let's go ahead and use this video to show how shallow the criticisms given are, as well as how much these people love to misrepresent the community.
The debate resurfaces like clockwork. Some players claim that they love these dry filler patches, say they need them. Their logic? It gives me time to catch up. They use
This is the most copium excuse I think I've ever heard in the history of gacha gaming. The copium excuse is, well, this filler patch is actually great because now I have so much extra time to save for all my newest waifus or all my newest characters. Now, I just simply don't have to play the game on this patch, or I don't have to play the game that much. And the thing is, if you're at the point where you're justifying a lackluster or content drought patch by saying, now I don't have to play the game as much, what does that even mean? Now at this point, you're happy that you don't have to play the game, or you're happy that there's less stuff to do in the game, and that's just such an odd thing to have, unless you're like a completely like whipped player that's just taking whatever the company's gonna give you. It's the worst one I've ever seen, and it's such a popular one for such a strange reason.
Before even getting into what they say about Genshin, can we first discuss how disingenuously that statement was portrayed? First, it has less than 1,000 upvotes in one of the biggest gaming subreddits, which I'm sure Glaive cut out for totally good reasons. Second, it's from a year ago, which if this was the only example you could find, shows how this isn't a sentiment widely accepted in the community. And the title of the Reddit post is literally unpopular opinion because it goes against what a majority of the community thinks. Then if you actually read the Reddit post, they aren't happy that they don't have to log into the game. They are happy because they're able to go back and play more of the older content they missed out on, because they were busy with real life stuff, because, you know, people actually do things outside of playing gacha games and don't have time to do all the permanent content that releases in a patch as they come out.
They use this downtime to clear story quests they ignored for months, finish exploring the 75% of the map they barely touched, or finally build that character they pulled 6 banners ago but never.
It's fair to say, right, that having issues like, oh, now I get time to do all the story quests that I wasn't going to do before, doesn't that just mean that the story quests might just take too fucking long? That they're so unwieldy, they're so unfun, there's something that nobody actually wants to do. And that only occurs, right, because the devs in their design of these quests make them as obtuse, annoying, and lengthy as possible. So it's like creating a problem, right, with the quests being unplayable, and then also give the solution of a filler patch so that people have time to play these unplayable quests. Amazing. Wow. Incredible. What a solution. Hats off to the devs for that.
Most story quests in Genshin are around 2 to 3 hours long or shorter, which seems to be about the same length as most companion quests in Wuwa. Once again, the quests released could have simply been put off because people are busy in real life. If you actually read the post Glaive is referencing, it literally states that they're excited to play the quests, not that they feel like they're being forced to do so.
I would say that Hoyoverse is kind of like at their limit. I would say they're kind of like at their peak in terms of where the design is going. You just have to look at the character releases in Natlan and how they seem so out of the ordinary, so outside of the box when it comes to creativity. Like, what is the reason for like full bodysuit latex like motorcycle people in the same region as like denim booty shorts DJ, and then like fish riding girl who like uses the maracas? It's such an odd combination of aesthetics where you just feel like the devs are quite literally just throwing random shit at the wall to see what works. And that to me is a sign that they are losing ideas, that they're like losing motivation on the design side. And it's pretty clear because Natlan just looks like a random combination of fucking the most absurd pop culture references you've ever seen. Like Kanish has like pixelated art. Like what is it? Like what is it supposed to be at the end of the day?
It's funny because regarding the Natlan designs, he quite literally points out the theme of Natlan's more traditional looking aesthetics being mixed with modernization, and there are lore reasons for this as well. The ancient dragons were a civilization very close to Natlan that, as shown and documented in the world quests, used phlogiston to power extremely advanced technologies, but they died out. Since they were powered by phlogiston, only some of the current humans can utilize them, like the Natlan cast. And then there's Shalonen, who's one of the most renowned blacksmiths of Natlan's age, who's working off of the groundworks of the ancient dragons, which is what built things like Malvika's motorcycle, which if you never noticed when riding it, it takes the shape of a dragon's head. Then with Kanich and a How is one of the ancient dragon lords that ruled ancient Natlan, which explains why his projection is pixel-like. Natlan is a mix of modernization with more tribal roots because it's made up of humans who've rebuilt their nation from the ground up, while trying to tap into an ancient, more advanced civilization that they don't fully understand, which is why only some of the people in the nation have elements of it. And of course, the characters Genshin want us to play are going to be the special people that can tap into phlogiston much easier, obviously. And if you're wondering why Natlan hasn't just full steam ahead dived into modernization, we get an explanation in Chaska's quest that the mass production of phlogiston-based technology can only come at the cost of harming Saurians, which the people of Natlan with morals don't want to do. So yeah, there's this amazing YouTube channel Nichirin that's been diving deep and explaining the lore and cultural significance of all the Natlan designs, and how they're not really that out of place and quite coherent with the inspirations, and I would advise looking at their channel to anyone who's genuinely interested in why Natlan characters look the way they do.
But let's get something straight, filler patches aren't just a minor inconvenience, they actively harm the game. People say, oh, it gives us time to catch up. No, that's just coping. These updates aren't designed to respect your time, they're designed to waste it. Filler patches recycle old content and stall the narrative. Instead of meaningful additions, we get rerun events, time-gated fetch quests, and lore drops that barely add anything. Imagine.
So with this in mind, how does any of that apply to version 5.4? Because at the time of Dumb and Dumber's video release, the update wasn't out yet to know whether or not it fixes the issues you're mentioning. Can you point to where in the live stream there's recycled old content? Where are the recycled events? Because besides the Leyline event, which is just the double drops that happens like every patch, all the events in 5.4 were unique. Where are the time-gated fetch quests too? None of those things happened. And in hindsight, saying that 5.4 was going to have lore drops that barely add anything is crazy, when it concluded most of the mysteries left from Raiden's backstory in Inazuma with her friends, giving her a much better conclusion, as well as expanding on the lore with the Inazuman yokai, which was largely a mystery. Then there was the amazing character anecdote event where you could just talk to most of the older characters and see how their journeys progressed, or how they're going about their lives for anyone that hasn't been the main focus of a quest in a while, giving us more character interactions as well as heartfelt moments like Chi-Chi and Yayo discussing their friendship, and how Yayo deals with the hardships of Chi-Chi's memory loss. This update gave us some of the best inter-character moments and expanded on the world of Genshin while ironing out most of the holes left in the Inazuma region in 2 amazing events, as well as Mizuki's story quest, which is also a banger. And if you think it's unfair to talk about the patch in hindsight, sure, but that goes to show just how you can't assess content before it comes out. This video was useless, as even going over the rest of the things said, it talks about nothing because again, the patch was unreleased at the time. It's just mindless doom posting poisoning people's perception of the patch before it's even out, which could have stirred people away from an experience they may have enjoyed otherwise, if they weren't told it's a filler patch not worth their time.
Storytelling mid, combat mid, events mid, even the character designs mid. If Hoyoverse can push out bare minimum update and still make millions, what incentive do they have to innovate?
Is this it? Is this the mind-breaking criticisms Hoyoverse is supposed to use to make their game better? Or this?
Only in Genshin, where they are still making the savior of nation run food deliveries. That's right.
You know, the food delivery event from 5 years ago where they took the feedback and didn't make an event similar to that premise again? If you have to reach from things that far back to call Genshin in its current state bad, maybe Genshin has actually improved over time. We are in version 5.6 of Genshin currently, with Skirk one of the most important characters to the lore coming up, and every Genshin patch so far has been amazing. except for version 5.1. We might even be getting another map expansion with the Mare Javari. At this point in every other Genshin version, there hasn't been that much to do, but the lore drops and teasers we've been getting have been fueling the community discussions, when usually there would be a drought by now. This is the longest a Genshin version has stayed relevant, so why are the people claiming they want Genshin to improve not discussing this? It's almost like videos in this nature are purely performative and don't offer anything valuable to the discussion. Now for the rest of Glaive's video, he goes on to discuss how Wuthering Waves filler patches are better than Genshin, and preemptively defends the fishing minigame in Wuwa and discussing how much depth it has, while something like the TCG in Genshin is the worst thing to grace the earth, even though they're basically just both disconnected minigames, away from the game's main gameplay loop. And you cannot make this up. I started working on this video like a month or two ago, and apparently Wuwa is now going to be adding a permanent TCG-like mode or something, which if it was added to Genshin, we know the exact type of responses we would be getting, but because it's Wuwa, someone like Saint has to pretend that he likes this mode and is interested in it, which in all fairness, I can't tell if he does like it or not. I'm just saying if this exact same format was copy and pasted into Genshin, he would be shitting on it. But I digress. Regarding the prior video, there really isn't anything important enough to be talked about for the context of this video. I just wanted to highlight how the people that say, oh, Genshin was so good in the past, or they want to just give Genshin criticism, are somehow always unable to move the discourse forward in a constructive way. There are multiple different types of criticisms. You have good faith constructive criticism that the developer can actually build upon, and then there's bad faith destructive criticism used to just rip the game apart for roast humor and comedy, to make people that already dislike the property laugh, and take a good guess as to what Saint and Glaive fall into. In regards to Genshin, these people never really liked the game at all, and even if Genshin improves to meet all of their standards, they still wouldn't play it, or claim that the changes have come too late, just as a way to downplay any progress Genshin can make. They fundamentally just don't like Genshin, and that's honestly okay, but when they bullshit and lie about how much they care about the game and use it to fuel negativity towards it, that's when it becomes a problem, especially when it's done in such a destructive way that benefits no one. Can you imagine if someone fell off in Genshin towards like the end of Sumeru, and when they wanted to get back into Genshin they see a video like this, a video filled with so much doom posting and lies and misinformation? They would never want to touch the game because they don't think it's progressed ever, and then they can go on to parrot this information, fueled by any of the feelings they may have had when they left the game, and they can go and spread that around, just creating a cycle of misinformation. When again, going into 5.x, I think it's the best Genshin has ever been gameplay wise, and that's why I think content like this is so damaging. And if you want more proof for the misinformation being spread and how these content creators are weaponizing your passion for these games, then just stick around, as with the introduction done we can get into the meat of the video. The term Hoyoshill, as I understand it, is often thrown around to anyone who plays Hoyoverse games and blindly defends the company's practices, just because they really enjoy the games. And at face value, yes, that definition makes sense. No one should let their enjoyment of a product blind them from any predatory practices the company may be doing. But the thing is, nowadays, the term doesn't really mean anything, and if you just play any Hoyoverse game at all, even if you are critical of it, you just become a Hoyoshill. Glaive somehow tries to paint Zejef, of all people, as a Hoyoshill or Genshin defender who doesn't talk about the negatives of the game, despite the fact that as an expert in Jeffology here, I know I've made poor life decisions. Zejef is one of the most critical creators about Genshin and discourages its predatory practices, so much so that he often overanalyzes character weaknesses in order to try and remove the FOMO people may have towards newer units, and he constantly encourages using 4-star alternatives instead of trying to get premium units. So if someone like Zejef is a Hoyoshill, then literally who isn't? If you are just positive about Hoyoverse in any light or critical of Wuwa, you're now a Hoyoshill. It's why Legions Gaming can go on and ask if the HSR 3.2 quest is worth playing. Someone responds being positive about 3.2, talking about why they liked it, and then despite asking for reasons to play HSR, Legion will berate someone giving their opinion on the patch and labeling them as a Hoyoshill just for enjoying the game. And the funniest part about this is that he hasn't even played the update to know whether it's good or bad or not. It was just made by Hoyoverse, therefore bad. Or when people are critical of Wuthering Waves Anniversary, instead of the EN Wuwa community wanting to address its issues and discuss them rationally, anyone who doesn't like the anime or is being too critical of it, going by this tweet that blew up in one of the biggest Wuwa communities, is an ex-Genshin player or Hoyoshill. So if you've just played Genshin before, you can't be critical of Wuwa, even if you've quit Genshin and are currently playing Wuwa. So I ask you, what does this term even mean at this point, or what weight does it hold when essentially anyone can just be labeled as one? It's just become a buzzword to immediately create division with anyone that isn't on the Wuwa hype train, in order for it to be made easier to attack attack someone, because if these people aren't actually Hoyoshills, then it means having to actually critically engage with what they're saying and address any potential shortcomings of Wuwa. But if you can just label them as a Hoyoshill, then instead of actually having a discussion, you can just go and clown on them for being a Hoyoshill and ignore problems people may have with the game, which funnily enough is the exact same toxic positivity the Genshin Impact fanbase had. And this will hurt the community in the long term, because whenever people want to rally behind issues, instead of everyone being able to focus their efforts to get the devs to notice them, most of the discourse will just be about filtering out all the Hoyoshills, which is not helpful at all. And if you want to see just how deeply this Hoyoshill fear-mongering has spread, shall we discuss a very specific group? A few months ago, St. Tontus made a video discussing the Zhanzhan, the XJJ group, which is a very pro-Hoyoverse faction that apparently congregated together to mass report the opposition's games like Wuwa, and how they were apparently responsible for Wuwa temporarily having a 16+ rating, with the source being this one wiki page and this random person on Twitter. But a couple of things, the Twitter page St. Tontus is using as a reference doesn't even mention this incident. He found two separate sources, one of which was about Kuro being last reported, and the other being on the XJJ, and he's making a conspiracy theory based off of this, trying to link them when there's no evidence at all that points to this.
And so with that, hopefully we provided all the context, we provided all the glue. I just want to clarify that, of course, this is just a theory, if that wasn't close enough. If I haven't stated that enough, it is just a theory for what is going on, but a lot of the pieces are fitting, and we've already seen a lot of behavior like this already when it comes to tarnishing the reputation of this game. And
then I decided to look more into this Echo Retro Twitter user, in which they have a pinned tweet with their sources on the XJJ, which if you look at the first link is an outdated wiki page that seemingly hasn't been updated for a while, and if you look at the site, it's a wiki specifically for internet groups in China, that as with all wikis, anyone is able to use or submit. And if you look at the language used on this page, it comes off as quite unprofessional, on top of the fact that it also doesn't really cite any sources, and just lists certain events that have occurred without any way of further looking into these incidents. There's also a clear bias against the group with this language, which leads me to believe that someone was maybe trolled by this group, spurring them into making this wiki post. But there is very little substantial evidence in this wiki at all, on top of the fact that it seems to be outdated, and even looking at the information provided, some of this stuff is very confusing. The first paragraph states that there's estimated to being over 20,000 members of the XJJ, but then later on the QQ group, which is like Discord, has over 30,000 members. And then they say there's propaganda and harassment channels in the server that all members have access to, but actually if you go back a few paragraphs, there's only around 500 people involved with the doxing and harassment, some of which can be also the same person, but there's also private QQ groups that we don't know what they do, therefore it must be bad. What am I reading? If I am to take a guess as to what is actually going on, I feel like it's just a big community of dedicated Hoyoverse players, and as with all communities, some of the people in there do bad things on private channels like the doxing or hate campaigns. I find it very hard to believe that there's 30,000 people in this group being the Hoyoverse KKK and attacking all Gacha creators and games in the space. On top of all the information on this page being poorly documented, as again there's no evidence or citations I can find in the page. So unless you're someone who's very involved with the CN community, I doubt that you can really know what they're doing. Now going back to the pinned tweet, the second link is an actual well-documented incident where Hoyoverse may have tried to support some of the XJJ's horrible doxing actions in HSR by using the names of the victims in one of the quests, which if this is true, which does very much seem like the case, is of course a terrible thing to do, and whoever wrote this quest in support of the doxing can go fuck themselves, and my heart goes out to all the victims affected. If you want more information on this, I'll leave a link in the description below. But now for the last link. It's supposedly about people exposing members of the XJJ for being horrible people or whatever, but if you just open the link, I shit you not, it's just Chinese Reddit for Wuwa, with the typical memes and commentary you would see anywhere else. So what about this has to do with the XJJ apparently trying to harm or hurt Kurogames? And the funniest thing about all of this is that this Twitter account isn't even from a CN player. This is someone in the EN community who watches and interacts with St. Tontus. They have no idea what the CN landscape is like. This part of the Wuwa community seems to be unable to recognize that people might just actually have problems with the game and not be Hoyoverse players. And this is the audience that people like St. Tontus and Glaive Kyo foster that bleeds into hurting the entire gacha space. Back like 3 to 4 years ago, some Genshin designs had to be censored. We still don't really know what caused this, and it could just be a freak case where Wuwa's rise in popularity leads to the CCP wanting to look at the game with more scrutiny, like with the majority of things getting censored in China. I doubt Nikkei was brigaded by Hoyoshills, but when the game went to CN servers, a lot of the designs and story elements were censored just because of CCP regulations. This could also be the same case for Wuwa, and I think it's more likely than the XJJ colluding together to get Wuwa's age rating up. And now, because of terrible unverified sources and a bunch of conspiracy theories, what actually happened is never going to be really addressed, and it can all be blamed on these Hoyoshills for doing something there's no actual proof of. And not only that, but but Kurogames was recently the victim of a hacking attempt, and Saint Tontus goes and makes another video chalking this up to being the XJJ. But what is absolutely comical is that a Chinese police investigation reveals that this was a large-scale overseas attack. You know, on a large scale as in a bunch of incels in the room probably couldn't do this, and overseas as in not Chinese, and therefore not from the XJJ, as Saints try to portray this as. Companies get targeted by hackers all the time for various different reasons. This isn't a unique thing, nor does it need to have a personal motive like being a crazy Hoyoshill. All the hack has shown is that there was a vulnerability with Kurogames, apparently, and hackers tried to exploit this. And unless further evidence is uncovered by this police report, that is all you can draw from it. And in general, as far as I know, there is no evidence of the XJJ actually doing something damaging to Wuwa. And the reason why someone like Saint wants to paint Hoyoverse and their players as the enemy and act like Wuwa or Kurogames are being attacked is because if people think Kurogames is being wrongfully attacked, they're obviously going to want to defend the company and the game against the attackers. It also again goes back to the term Hoyoshill, because now people in the Wuwa community now have a justification to hate people who play Hoyoverse games, because these horrible Hoyoshills attacked first, and then that's going to make Hoyoverse players obviously fight back, feeding into the Gacha tribalism that Saint benefits from, as it's what his content revolves around. Kurogames has to be this victim or underdog to justify all the methods of supporting it and the hate against Hoyo players, as it makes it look like they are punching down. That is the reason for the term Hoyoshill, it's to lump all the crazy fanatics that dogs people in with the people that just play the game, as well as screen out anyone that has criticisms of Wuwa to just be a Hoyoshill and shun them out of conversations. These creators will literally champion the death and torture of animals that deranged individuals have done.
Know firsthand how absurdly unhinged the CN part of the Genshin player base can be. We know all about how they did things like cats that look like Scaramouche, how they've
doing everything except playing your own game, from VA's harassment, bomb threats, killing animals,
and tried to lump every person that just likes Genshin or Hoyo games in with them, despite the fact that no sane human would agree to these actions. And the Genshin community was extremely vocal about how horrible situations like these were, and I wish that part of the Wuthering Waves community that defends these content creators would realize that they're trying to get you mad at these people they're making up, in order to hone you to attack anyone that is pro Hoyo or not pro Kuro. If you tell someone that the thing they like is garbage, that is going to make them want to say the same thing back, which just creates this stupid cycle of blaming each other for attacking them first, and at this point it doesn't matter who attacked who first. If you wanted to stop, you have to be the change you want to see in the community, and stop it yourself. If someone says Genshin is bad and you should feel bad for playing it, saying Wuthering Waves is just as bad in return will not make the other person back down, it will make them want to shit on Genshin more, and then people will see this discourse and just jump in with their own opinions on what game is better than the other, while slandering the other one. And as we've seen over the past few months, it goes absolutely nowhere. So the best course of action if you want the communities to ever stop fighting is, if you see a hate post on either side, don't like it, don't respond, simply just ignore it and move on. These social media platforms work on interaction, so the less of it you engage with, the less of it you will see. Now, to get back into the meat of the video, I know so many of you are probably going to want to mention all the contracted content creators that get paid to only talk about Hoyoverse and its games positively. So let's actually talk about the Hoyoverse contract, shall we? So one of the notions I've seen spread around about Genshin content creators who are mostly positive about the game is that they are put under contractual obligation to do so, or that the Genshin creator contracts that Hoyoverse put out in general are extremely predatory and harmful to creators. With this resurfacing due to Tekton's video on Hoyoverse contracts a few months back now.
Is that now I'm going to show you yet another creator talking about this. I am now going to show you 5 more creators confirming that this is real. And there's even many creators who are transparent that they are on this, and I will still receive comments that there is not a fake positivity issue in Genshin Impact because they are trying to secure a f***ing bag.
I'm kind of realizing now how long this video has taken me to make, because in my script this said recent, which it's not at all now. But regarding Tekton's video, I think you can see where this is going, but let's first show the contract documented in the video.
The contract, 10 plus YouTube videos per month, live streaming exceeding 30 hours per month.
Which, yeah, this is one of the worst contracts I've ever seen. Quite literally a slave contract. And I will admit something, this is a real contract. It isn't a Hoyoverse contract though. A few days before this video went live, I actually received this contract as well. And I'm not going to tell you what game or company it's from, but it's not a Hoyoverse game and it's not from a Hoyo. But don't take my word for it, even in the tweet Tekton shows, there's no mention of it being a Hoyoverse contract. This was just a lie. And as someone who has lots of friends that are Genshin creators that are actually on Hoyoverse contracts, they look nothing like this. Hell, even the person who tweeted this not only commented on Tekton's video saying it wasn't a Hoyoverse contract, but he also then tweeted at Tekton saying that it wasn't a Hoyoverse contract, with this tweet gaining more traction than the original post Tekton showed. But Tekton, to my knowledge, on his videos or tweets has never acknowledged the fact that this being a Hoyo contract wasn't true. Maybe he did in a stream, but I don't watch streamers in general, so I wouldn't know. Even in this video, Tekton dances around to the point and just never lists actual creators on the supposed contract, and just fearmongers that there are creators on this contract that doesn't exist, mind you, and says that he can list them, but when it comes to it, he obviously can't, because no creator follows the schedule, and no Hoyoverse creator can be on this contract because it isn't real.
Now, how many creators do you think line up with that scheduling? Posting every 3 days or so, twice a week, and then doing 30 hours of streams every month, roughly around there. With that logic. Hold up. Do I show this? You know what? I won't. You guys can figure out exactly who this may or may not be applying to.
And the thing that's kind of frustrating is that Tekton could have very easily verified whether or not this contract was real or a Hoyoverse contract by just asking on Twitter if any other creator have received it, or hell, DM EO who said he's received it, or DM the creator making the claim in the first place. Once again, the standard for information and proof are in hell in the gacha space. Someone can literally use a source that says the opposite of what they are claiming and still run with the narrative that Hoyo is bad, and people will believe it without fact checking or verifying anything. And what implying that creators positive about Hoyoverse are in these slave contracts leads to is people simply just not believing and antagonizing any Genshin CC that's positive about the game because, oh, they must have sold their soul for cash and they're lying to their audience, which, as I said prior, breeds more hate and toxicity to people who can just genuinely enjoy the game. So when you see a tweet or post from a creator defending any of the Hoyoverse games, it surely can't be because they enjoy it. It must be because they signed away their rights to voice their thoughts, which justifies and makes it easier to attack any Hoyoverse creators. I have seen Hoyoverse contracts. I know multiple creators on actual Hoyoverse contracts. I have talked to the people that manage Hoyoverse contracts, and from everything I've seen, there is no clause anywhere that makes it so that their contract gets terminated or they get punished if they're critical of Hoyoverse. And the funniest thing about this whole discourse, especially with Tekton mentioning Gacha Smack, is that Smack looked through an actual Hoyoverse contract in depth that showed you they were allowed to renegotiate terms every 3 months and leave at any time they wanted, with no punishment or fees, in which he was actually surprised with how good the contract was for that.
You know what? This is important. The term of validity, how long are we doing this for? Is divided into a probation period, so kind of like a testing period to see how things go, and the long-term formal period. 3 months is the long-term formal period. So every time 3 months is up, you reassess and see how things are going with this company. That is how I understand that. So this is actually really cool because you're not signing like 4-year contract, and let's say you sign the 4-year contract, you don't like what you're getting paid. Well, you're stuck for 4 years at that particular point. They're saying you get a 1-month testing period, and then the long-term period is going to be every 3 months. So, I mean, that is great. That's really good for the creator. That means you're not like committing to anything long. It says both parties have the right to terminate this agreement without cause, provided they give reasonable notification to the other party. That's fantastic. So not only can you sign like a short-term contract, you also have whenever you want to be like, all right, you know what? I ain't feeling this. Let's go ahead and call it quits. Putting in my 2 weeks on this contract. All right, put in a 2 weeks on the contract. Go ahead and get up out of there. I did find is there wasn't a fee, like $100,000 fine or a $500,000 fine. I didn't find that anywhere in any of these pages. So you don't get hit with no hefty fee like you do with an NDA. Which is another positive for the content creator.
There are still some negatives, as Gacha Smack highlighted, from the contract he had. They can turn down sponsors they dislike, and there are some other things he mentioned like the pay caps, which are dissatisfactory. Though again, you can leave at any time or renegotiate terms once every 3 months while not getting penalized. So what is the actual problem with these contracts? What makes them predatory or harmful to creators? And the thing that actually makes me kind of sad about this whole discourse is that 2 people I know have had their lives changed with the amount of money and opportunities this contract gave them, allowing them to become full-time creators, and one of the people I know is able to support their family with the help of this contract. It has been a net positive for them, and for this weird fear-mongering of a contract that has very fair terms in my opinion to be spun as this evil thing silencing Hoyoverse CCs, it's just upsetting to know that there's potentially creators in bad financial positions turning this down because they think they're selling out by signing them, or think they'll be trapped in a horrible deal, which from all the evidence I've seen seems to be false. Alas, from this point in the video onwards, instead of talking about actual just misinformation that's been spread, I'm now going to shift into talking about my opinion opinion on things like Powercreep and Genshin, Star Rail and ZZZ, as well as minor things like Genshin's exploration, to try and give opinions that go against the popular consensus, as once again I feel like things are being very exaggerated in a misleading manner to portray the games as poorly as possible. So this is just a minor point, but I want to tackle the notion that Genshin currently has pay-to-win movement mechanics in Natlan, which is simply something I've never really understood, or at least I would understand the criticism if you don't actually use the characters or tools given to you. Before even getting to Natlan, Hoyoverse has constantly added ways to traverse in your regions. Both in Azuma and Sumeru offer ways for you to just grapple around the map, and then there's bounce pads as well around the chasm and in Sumeru. And then in Fontaine, like half the exploration was underwater, and there was the Numa Uja mechanic in which some characters innately just had the Numa Uja, so puzzles could be solved much easier. And if you weren't a character that had these traits, then you'd have to find an orb to enable you to gain those powers. So Genshin has always given you the tools for exploring more conveniently all across the regions. Hell, even in Leeway. In some of the mountainous parts, if you just keep gliding, you can randomly get a gust of wind to carry you upwards to help you keep traversing in the air. In Natlan, the main complaints I've seen is that the characters belonging to the region get so much more exploration or quality of life compared to people who don't have the characters, or even the Saurians, which just isn't true, or at least besides Varessa, who I actually do think is just too much. All the Saurians are just as good at exploration, if not better than the Natlan cast, at what they're designed to do. Mualani and the Hydrosaurian are both effective swimmers. Hell, the Hydrosaurian, if you aren't sprinting, is able to swim indefinitely, which is something Mualani can't do, as she always consumes Night Soul, and there really isn't a notable speed difference between the two. With Kinich, I originally thought the Yumkasaur would be worse, but after playtesting, the Yumkasaur seems to just be better. Kinich moves slightly faster, but it seems like you just get the same amount of height while traversing, or at least it isn't that noticeable. And there are even certain things the Yumkasaur does better than Kinich. For starters, they can enable a mid-air attack for some extra height even without grappling, so you're able to do 3 mid-air attacks whereas Kinich can only do 2. They're also able to completely regain their grappling hook charges after using a grapple point where Kinich isn't. And they are also able to just run up walls for some extra vertical height whenever they want, whereas Kinich has to use his grappling hook first, and it still ends up being quite clunky because you can end up actually climbing the wall. So I think I actually just prefer the Dendrosaurian to Kinich. They kind of just have better movement options, but no, the pay to win mechanics. Moving on to Shilonen, I will also concede that you seem to be more comfortable climbing with her than the Saurian or Kachina, who is just worse than both, but I don't think the difference is again really anything that impactful. For Chaska and the Kukusaurs also feel better. You're able to descend indefinitely with the Kukusaur and it won't consume any phlogiston unlike Chaska. And again, looking over my footage, I don't pick up a notable speed difference between the two. And if you are within the Kwahukan Cliffs, anyways, there are so many places for you to just get infinite stamina, to where you can just fly comfortably to your heart's content in this region where flying is required. For the Cryosaurian, they are the same as Sitlali or Roron. I can't notice a difference at all. These aren't even really exploration units and are just used for solving puzzles. Then with the Pyro Orca Movuika, besides just traversing land, she isn't really that spectacular at doing anything else. Her swimming, climbing, and flying all have separate stamina bars that get consumed pretty quickly to where you can't even just depend on it solely. Her flight is only sustainable in the Kwahuakan Cliffs, and even then she still can't interact with everything like the Saurians can, and she's unable to descend or gain height. And she's only able to activate the grapple when next to a hook point, so no, Movuika, despite being able to utilize all the movement mechanics, is always inferior to just using the dedicated Saurian. Jack of all trades, master of none-ass character. And lastly we get to Varessa, where as I said before, I am in agreement that I think she's too strong of an exploration unit, and should have the same restrictions they gave Yontan and the Electrosaurian. So that is at most 2 Natlan characters that are not even that much better than their Saurian counterpart. What are we really complaining about? Because people are vastly overrating just how good the Natlan characters actually are at exploring. And everywhere you would need to use a Saurian, you are given one to traverse or solve a puzzle. And not to be that guy, but this is a gacha game! If you genuinely think the exploration is that big of an upside, despite the fact that as shown it's really not, then just pull for the characters. Any of them. You don't actually have to spend real money to obtain a C0 Varessa, Mualani, Kinich, or Shilonen. They're all strong characters in the meta as well, and you can just grind the Primogems you need to obtain them, like you would with any other character in the game. But as I have already proven, you don't need to do that. And a lot of people comment on the fact that these characters don't feel that good outside of Natlan, which is also something I've said, in which Yeah, you don't need these crazy tools outside of Natlan because that's not how the developers want you to interact with their worlds. And in the other regions, you are given the traversal tools they want you to have for any given activity. What the fuck would being able to fly indefinitely in one stat do for you? And in other regions like Enkanomiya, the parts of the map being segmented is intended, which just flying all over the place would ruin. The only reason these dumbass arguments are being made in the first place is just because they can compare it to Wuwa, and how you can fly indefinitely in one of the areas. You can wall run and you can mantle and whatnot, which at base gives you more movement options than Genshin. Which if you want to say you prefer Wuwa's traversal, sure, but to say things like,
From the business practices seen on both sides, that one company has a lot more respect for their players and their past expenditures than others.
But there is a way to tastefully do region locking and not make it predatory and not make your consumers feel insulted and feel stupid.
Pulling characters strictly for the massively improved experience they give you in the overworld. And the Kuro devs aren't using quality of life as FOMO to increase their banner sales.
So you really didn't need to buy any of them if you wanted just exploration. You could have bought Mavica. It's predatory as fuck. Natlan is the region of greed. It is not the region of war. It is the region of greed.
They designed their overworlds with the intention of creating inconvenience, annoyances, and frustration if you don't save the resources for or spend on the on-banner character.
can you imagine saying things like this about any other open world game? In Spider-Man 2, you're able to web sling and fly all over the place with web wings at lightning fast speeds, because the objectives in the Spider-Man open world are at different levels of verticality, and some of the activities like chasing cars involve you having to move at these speeds, so it makes sense why the traversal in this game is like this. But when you get to a game like Elden Ring, this is the most of your exploration experience. Look at this bullshit! Why is my Tarnish not able to fly and grapple up those buildings? Why don't I get power-ups that allow Torrents to jump indefinitely? From Software clearly doesn't respect you or your time as a player if they think you're going to be okay with this. It's not like the traversal given to the player is set within the grasp of how they're supposed to engage with the world. The reason you can't do things like fly indefinitely in regions that don't demand it or grapple hook to any area you want in Genshin is simply because that isn't how Hoyoverse wants you to engage with their earlier regions. On top of the fact that it would also just to break a lot of the puzzles they set up. Natlan is more open to putting things out of your way because they give you the tools to fly indefinitely or jump 3 times what you normally can, but that is not the case for the earlier regions, which is why Natlan characters have to be so restricted, so they don't just break the earlier puzzles. But I think that's all I need to say regarding how the traversal system being paid to win simply is not true. Being able to run slightly faster than the other cast or chaining together a team that can't handle any hard fights is just slightly more convenient and doesn't lock you out of anything. You are given multiple free tools to aid you in exploring every region. Alas, that's all I really have to say about this topic, so let's move on to talking about something a lot more subjective, in which I would like to discuss endgame modes as well as power creep. I'm a Genshin theory crafter and I'm able to get all premium rewards in all 3 endgame modes across the games, even though I've barely played HSR and ZZZ, and I've quit multiple times when the games bored me. This topic is going to be a lot more subjective than the others, so if that doesn't interest you, then go ahead and skip to the end of my conclusion. This section doesn't really affect that much. To close this video out, the last topic I want to dive into is power creep and endgame, as I also think that this discussion has become like actual cancer in this community. I'm mostly going to be going over the points being spearheaded by Saint Tontis, as he's the loudest and dumbest when it comes to things like this, just shouting buzzwords without any substance. And I have seen people actually take him seriously when it comes to things like this, which is insane, as he commonly criticizes the big 3 Hoyoverse games for the endgame being too hard, but he barely understands how to properly play the games in the first place, especially when he isn't being wheelchaired by his chat, and he also doesn't understand the fundamental mechanics of the game anyways, so his opinion on these endgame modes should not be taken seriously, when he doesn't understand the combat systems of the game he's discussing. Saint Tontis has said that Genshin is unplayable without elemental reactions.
The DOT system isn't supposed to be the main way to deal damage. Yeah, this is the thing. Guess what happens in Genshin Impact? Yeah, if you don't use the elemental reactions, your team is actually not playable.
Which first of all isn't even true. There are tons of teams without reactions at the center that are still more than good enough to clear. And even if the game was unplayable without reactions, that's what you signed up for when you downloaded the game, that's combat is focused around elemental reactions. And again, can you imagine saying this about any other game on the planet with RPG elements? Hey guys, Elden Ring is unplayable if you don't learn how to dodge. Pokemon is unplayable if you don't match type weaknesses. Wuwa is unplayable without intro or outro skills. Sekiro is unplayable if you don't parry. That is just the core mechanic of the game and not an actual flaw with it. And this is who is leading the arguments about the problems with Powercreep and Endgame in Hoyoverse gachas. St. Tontis had a debate with Sekapoko, which for whatever reason he decided to post, despite getting destroyed for a good 70% of the video, where he randomly starts bringing up ICDs to sound smart when they weren't necessary for the discussion at all.
Right, that little electro pony that's in the second side of the abyss, where
Sure.
you literally want to make sure you have like your ICDs are lining up. Your ICDs are like lining up to like ensure that you're dealing enough elemental ticks to like break the shield in time. Yeah, exactly. There are specific units that, because of like the specific things built into their kit and how much they shill the design of the boss, they make the fight absurdly simple and easy. And if you don't have them in, it becomes an absolute nightmare.
But there's a lot of characters that do that, though. Like, a lot.
Yeah, I don't think that's a good thing.
Wait, to have a lot of characters that can beat the bosses in different ways?
To have bosses that are specifically designed around owning one or, like, you know, like 1 or 2, maybe 3 characters on the roster, and then they absolutely trivialize it. And then if you don't have those bosses, you might as well go, you know...
There's a lot. There's like 96 characters in Genshin, so I can list every single character that will get through this mechanic. There's a lot.
Yeah.
Mavuika said...
Lali Arlecchino, Chevres, Charlotte, Risley, Linny, Dea, Layla, Shenhe, Tomakana, Ayaka, I did it the other day, it's cool. Ganyu, Rosaria, Yanfei, Klee really well, actually. Not bad. Kaya, Bennett, Zhangling.
That's the 1 or 2.
Yeah, what if you don't want to play them?
So you don't want to play the characters that are good for the fight?
Nightmare. That's
Okay,
the difference.
That argument is bullshit, by the way. Okay, literally every single player in Genshin owns Kachina, who is a free character that we have all received.
Yeah, I don't want to use a midget on
that
my team.
character is free.
I don't want to use her.
Every single player that did the event in Genshin owns Odoron. He's free this patch. He
Yeah,
can jump high.
I don't want to use
The
him.
most owned character in Genshin Impact is named Kazuha. He jumps.
I don't want to use him.
It's like saying, "Hey, I don't have C6 Mortifae on my account, but I've been playing for 3 years."
Yeah, there's no content in the game that requires a C6 Mortifae.
Okay, so the game is easier.
St. Tontis is out here playing Nahida in burning teams where she can't trigger her mark. And I could backseat his terrible gameplay and team building, but that can be for another video, I digress. Now, the first thing I want to lead to this discussion with is that endgame content is not for every player, and it's not supposed to be accessible to everyone by nature. Most of these games' content exists independent of endgame modes. Even if you take away Genshin's endgame, you have the entire open world, Archon quests, story quests, and so on. The same thing with HSR to a lesser extent, especially with the fact that the game literally drops 8-hour-long quests to keep you occupied. They don't expect you to do that in one sitting, they expect you to play and digest that over the course of an update to keep you busy, and that has been the loop since launch. And the same thing with ZZZ as well, with the seasonal events to give you something else to do alongside that. The endgame in these games don't lock you out of any meaningful content or stop you from progressing the story. They are designed for people who like combat a lot and want to be tested. You do get the premium currency for beating endgame modes, but even then you can get a majority of the premium rewards by doing the lower difficulty options the game provides you. For Deadly Assault and Theater, getting a partial completion will still give you all the premium currency, and even if you can't push all the way through MOC or Spiral Abyss, you can still net a large amount of gems through partial clears. And if you care so much about getting all of these rewards, then you as the player should work towards that. These endgame modes are optional content which will not hinder your experience if you choose to ignore it, and the difficulty and inaccessibility is not a design flaw, it's the design intent. You are supposed to be challenged, you're supposed to struggle, and you're ideally supposed to bang your head against the wall until you complete it. And if you can't, then tough, it's your job to rise to that challenge. I don't know where the idea that the endgame content is supposed to be a chore you do every time it resets come from. In fact, the Hoyoverse games are probably some of the most generous when it comes to endgame content in the wider gaming space. A while ago, I was really into Destiny and its endgame modes were called raids that are infinitely more challenging than anything in these gacha games, whilst actually locking you out of some of the best set pieces, equipment, and upgrades if you didn't do them. Not only that, but you needed to assemble a full team of 6 without matchmaking, grind to get your level up to play the mode, and on top of that, if you didn't bring the right gear, people just wouldn't team up with you, as you'd be too much of a hindrance. And one run of these raids that lasted hours wouldn't even get you everything that you needed, on top of drops being RNG. So to see people complaining about fucking ZZZ's endgame being too difficult, or pretending they're being locked out of meaningful content when it's normally just a wave of recycled mobs in a recycled arena baffles me. Even if I couldn't personally clear the content, I don't think I'd be missing out on too much of an experience. Hell, if we're talking about Zenless, I have an M0 Ellen which I got on release, and like 2 months ago now I wasn't able to clear. I was using a Colita with my Evelyn because I didn't have lighter, and I played the game on and off, but after looking at some guides on how to play these characters and what drive discs I should be farming, even without being the best at the game or having the best stuff, I'm currently able to clear with the 1.0 team. On Ellen, who's one of the woo. Again, I need to clarify, I scripted this before the Ellen buffs were even announced. She's very good now, but I was able to clear with her prior even without the buffs, while using Evelyn with Kolida, who's a very hard character to play, and it was satisfying going from not being able to clear to being able to do it on stream without that much difficulty, because it was a struggle to get here, and that is what endgame mode should feel like. And in HSR, you are literally given 41 days to formulate a strategy to plan out what your best pull should be to make your account stronger, as well as what you should farm. So no, endgame modes do not have to be accessible to everyone. They are a goal you are meant to work towards by design, and it's completely optional. But that's it with the wider endgame discussion. Let's move on to talk about HP inflation. So a lot of the sentiments I see in the gacha space, or at least the vocal complaining part, is that HP inflation isn't a valid way to increase difficulty, and therefore by increasing enemies' HP, Hoyoverse is artificially creating difficulty, instead of introducing mechanics that challenge the player. And then people will just link charts and be like, look how much the HP has increased, missing context to show why the HP has increased in the first place. One thing I do want to put out there is that HP inflation is not inherently a bad thing, nor does it show a lack of confidence on the developer's part. Increasing HP pools has always been a way to increase difficulty in any RPG ever. If you look at Elden Ring, you fight Margit, who has a low amount of HP, but when you fight him again later in the game, he now has a more complex moveset on top of his HP increasing. Is From Software just no longer confident in their enemy designs? Obviously not. This is just made with the expectation that you get stronger across your journey or improve enough at the game to where Margit having a higher HP bar when you refight him doesn't hinder you. And I do get that the main complaints for HP inflation in the endgame modes is that it's the same content but now harder, but I just wanted to point out how increasing HP pools is a tool used by literally every RPG developer in existence as a way to add difficulty, so just yelling HP inflation isn't actually a negative if you don't substantiate why that is. Now to move on to complaints about HP inflating with the same content, I still feel like this discussion is being completely overblown for a few reasons. First, when looking at 1.0 cycles with ZZZ, HSR, or Genshin, I feel like people forget that they were complete jokes. Up until around like mid-Sumeru or around the beginning of Fontaine for Genshin at least, people were complaining that the Abyss was too easy and that the enemies were too squishy for a majority of good accounts. So when you scale up from something that was almost considered a joke, it almost becomes in a way an adequate challenge. But this is also another thing that I hate with HP inflation arguments, because it has the assumption that there's this standard damage that majority of players are at, and it's just an arbitrary line that never changes. Let's say a boss has 1,000,000 HP and at the investment level your team is at, you do 1,000,000 damage in a rotation or cycle or whatever, so you're able to kill this boss in one rotation. With the assumption that no new supports come out or you don't pull another DPS and every boss from this point on only has 1,000,000 HP, let me tell you what eventually will happen. For Genshin, every beneficial artifact substat is around a 2% increase, so let's say you get 2 upgrades to all 5 of your artifacts on your DPS, that's around a 20% DPS increase right there. Let's say a new combo is found out with your character, which does happen like in Malvika and Varesa's case, that makes the character even stronger than what you were doing before. Or maybe you get a constellation or weapon on your DPS when they rerun, boosting their damage even more with relatively early upgrades. Or hell, people also just find better ways to beat bosses over time. If the HP stayed the same, even if no new characters came out to power creep the old ones, people will get better at using their characters and get upgrades for characters over time, to where if HP doesn't increase, you will just outscale the content and it will be too easy. And from here, the common argument is, oh, just add more mechanics to the enemies or bosses, but I feel like people ignored that mechanics only work if the enemy doesn't immediately fucking die. Let's look at rune guards in Genshin. These are supposed to be challenging enemies, or at least at the beginning of the game they were extremely powerful, and one of the only ways to stop them is to aim at their weak points twice to stun them. But now we're at a level in Genshin where people don't actually interact with the rune guards in this way, and instead just kill them. Because who gives a shit about the enemy's mechanics when you can just choose to kill them instead? Did you know that the Pyro Fatui agent actually has a mechanic where he sends out clones all around you and then does a finisher attack when he gets enough clones? No, because most people just kill it before that happens. It was only in Natlan where they added this enemy as a local legend that people could see that, hey, these guys are actually pretty difficult to manage. So unless HP pools are high enough in the first place or the mechanics being added make you unable to do damage, or massively increase the enemy's defense, adding mechanics onto the same HP pool won't do anything because people will choose to just ignore the enemy's mechanics and kill it instead. In a way, HP inflation almost facilitates mechanics, as the higher a boss's HP is, the more ways the developer can throw things at you to trip you up. And another thing I dislike about HP inflation arguments when you just look at a graph and soy out about how much it increases is that if you look at the MOC cycle where Svarog had tons more HP than he did previously, that MOC had a mechanic where percentage-based damage was dealt to elite enemies if he killed the Trotters. If Svarog had the same amount of HP with those mechanics in the MOC, he would just die instantly. Nikador has a ridiculous amount of HP too, but only because if you kill the totems he spawns, you can fucking nuke him, which if he had 1.2 enemy HP, again, he would just die. The pillar boss in Genshin has a ton of HP too, but when you break the pillars, his resistance is dropped by 90%, making you deal a lot more damage to him, and the pillars you break nuke 15% of his HP. And because of this, it makes it so that any team you bring to that boss can realistically clear in 2 cycles of pillars, resulting in very consistent clears no matter what team you use. So no, you can't really just point to a graph and yell HP inflation, because in isolation it isn't even really a bad thing. And Hoyoverse continues to add mechanics to these enemies or endgame modes that justifies why the HP has to increase in the first place. And speaking of mechanics, let me just rant about the Natlan enemies, as this is also something that's been discussed horrendously even by Genshin YouTubers, as well as those outside the space that don't understand how these enemies actually work. Every single one of these enemies is extremely manageable with or without Natlan characters or specific units. If not, using the less popular options can even just be better than what you would think. Starting with the Pyro Dinosaur, which you apparently need a C6 Yulon for.
But this looks awful. This looks like something like if you don't have Farida, maybe like C6 Yulon can take it out.
The boss doesn't stay in the sky. The gimmick is that it will fly down and spawn 2 Pyro Blooms, and you have to take out all of the blooms for it to stay on the ground so you can rail on it with elemental application. Furina having her pets that automatically target the dragon is nice, but it's not a sole requirement. And Jingcho, a 4-star, has the fastest Hydra application in the game, making it much easier with him. So even fucking Barbara could do this effectively. This is just an application check, which is the exact same thing for the Papilla. It's not a Natlan check, it's an elemental application check. Hyperbloom teams destroy this, double Hydra teams with Jingcho destroy this, burning teams destroy this, which don't even need Emily to be good. You can play quick burn setups with Nahida. Any team that enables C6 Fischl can destroy this. There are so many non-Natlan ways to make this mechanic a joke. And the narrative that Natlan characters are amazing at destroying this needs to die, because only specific Natlan characters that have a lot of hits are good at destroying it. You need a specific combo for Malvika to break it. Mualani can't break this without a burning team. Varessa is slower at breaking this than Chlor and Fischl teams. So again, this is not at all a Natlan check, it's a hit count check. For the Hot Cryo Lady, just bring Pyro or Fast Electro application and you can trivialize it. Nothing much to say. And for the Pillar boss, which is the most controversial, Kachina is free for starters, and she's just a walking scroll set. You literally don't even need to level her up for her to give full value to teams. Why is the entire community acting like using Kachina as some kind of cardinal sin? You would use her in the exact same teams you'd use Shilonen in. You not wanting to use Kachina is not an excuse when the game gives you her for free. And even if you don't want to use Kachina for some reason, people meme the solution, but for medium character models, there's a spot where you can just run and jump, and you can climb the pillar quite easily. The boss is in the overworld, and you can learn this trick in less than 10 minutes. It really isn't that deep. Most teams in Genshin use at least one character with a medium model, in which the climbable part of the pillar is really wide and faces towards the boss, in which all you have to do is look left and jump into this ridge. And even if you don't want to do that, so many characters have vertical movement. Some very flexible characters have vertical movement, like Kazuha and Shanyan. Most Natlan characters who aren't Shilonen or Kachina are able to just jump up to it. Even if you want to discount climbing, there are simply too many ways for almost every team in the game to climb this pillar for it to be a real issue. But that's all I have to say regarding the Natlan enemies. Because of the release time of this video, I was going to bring up how St. Tontus completely misrepresents the miasma mechanic in ZZZ, making it sound way worse than what it actually is, but so many creators have clowned on him, so I don't see the need. I was going to discuss power creep in a lot more depth, but to be honest, this video is getting way too long, so I will just try to sum up my thoughts very briefly so we can all move on with our lives. In the big 3 Hoyoverse gachas, especially with Genshin and ZZZ, power creep is almost a non-factor for these games. You can say things like Miyabi and Malvika are so much stronger than everyone else, but as a pattern, characters like these are very rare and relegated to very important lore characters. On top of the fact that you never really need the type of damage a Malvika or Miyabi brings. Malvika being 30% better than Arlecchino doesn't matter when Arlecchino can still make the Abyss a joke. Miyabi being stupid OP doesn't matter when there are people using free-to-play Billy comps, dominating the game, while not even using the full allotted time for a max clear. You can say power creep exists, but in isolation it isn't really a problem. Genshin very often goes back to buff older units and archetypes through newer characters. Zenless didn't even really have a power creep problem, as the older units are still viable, with a free A rank being one of the best supports, and yet they still buffed Ellen despite her clearing content fine. And HSR, which in my opinion did have the most issues with making characters obsolete, is also trying to rectify its issues by making older units stronger, as well as the fact that it also constantly buffs older units with newer supports, allowing a majority majority of the older DPS to still be viable. Herta clearing 2 cycles faster than Jinglu doesn't really matter if you're still able to earn all the rewards with Jinglu. At that point, you're just baby raging that your favorite character isn't as strong anymore, and not with the reality that you aren't being locked out of anything. Every live service RPG in the history of everything has power creep. What matters is how games manage it, in which I think all the Hoyoverse games are doing a pretty good job, honestly. Some better than others. The real problem instead of power creep is how the endgame modes in these games show certain units by buffing them in all endgame modes, and in HSR just designing enemies around specific characters, because it creates a false sense of reality with how strong the characters are. If Fei Zhao is one cycling MOC during her release with minimal investment, of course when they stop shilling her and shill the new unit, that's going to make Fei Zhao feel so much more worse in comparison. Whereas if they weren't shilled at all, we could make much fairer comparisons. That is the real problem in my opinion, not necessarily power creep. But with that, I have rambled long enough, let's close out this video. All in all, as we can see from everything I've pointed out in this video, a lot of the pretenses for arguments between gacha communities are quite literally from fabrications, frontlined by figures like Saint Tontus and Glaive Kyo and the likes, to just make people angry at each other for their benefit. And this tribalism has not helped any of the games be better or made the community better. In fact, it's only made the communities worse and more toxic, with all the misinformation, engagement farming, and pointless discourse over nothing being started. And as I have alluded to in the title, attitudes and behaviors like this will only make the gacha community a more toxic and unpleasant place to be, as suddenly everything is an agenda or conspiracy theory. No one can actually like playing Hoyoverse games, they're being paid out and bootlicking, and no one can actually enjoy Wuwa, either they obviously just hate Genshin and nothing else. If you dislike something about Wuwa, you better hope you have never mentioned Genshin ever, because instead of people actually discussing your complaints about the game, you have now been labeled a Hoyoshill sent to ruin the image of the innocent Kurogames, sent by the masterminds of the XJJ, and be prepared to receive personal attacks instead. These types of attitudes in the gacha community either just lead to toxic positivity or toxic negativity for both sides, with people unable to actually engage with any actual criticisms or positives about the game, which is obviously bad, as players don't know what issues to rally against or what to actually celebrate. Now, with the issues in the community I've laid out, there's really only one resolution on how to get the bad actors out of it. Saint Tontus has pretty much just become the lol cow of gacha games, with people realizing how much bullshit he spews, leading to his videos being mass disliked. But dislikes don't actually do anything. You are still clicking on, giving watch time to, and engaging with content like this, which gives people like Saint attention and views. Then he can also cry about how he's being a victim even though he's the one who shot first. People like this only care about attention and making money, and as I've proven over the course of the video, don't actually give a fuck about what they're saying. They just want all the clicks and attention no matter how bad it makes them look. So you simply just have to block and ignore horrible videos and obvious rage bait posts. On YouTube you can click on a do not recommend button, and on Twitter and Reddit you can just block accounts that serve to just engagement farm. And once clowns like this realize that they're getting no attention, they'll move on to where else they can grift about. And if anyone watching this happens to be in the Gacha Police Twitter community or is an avid watcher of these engagement bait channels, I just want to tell you that these people do not give a fuck about you or what you're passionate about. It may be nice to hear figures in the community validate what you like and dislike, but they know that and they're using you and exploiting your passion for money and attention. People that actually cared about your interests would not spread so much misinformation and pump out tons of videos where they haven't even done the bare minimum for research. People that actually care about your interests also do not try and weaponize you against every person who disagrees with you and tells you to disregard their opinion. These people are trying to make you angry and upset and constantly paint themselves and you as victims, while they profit off of your time and money and you get nothing in return. I really believe you guys are more intelligent than that, and if after this video you still want to play into this petty tribalism just because you dislike a game or like one more than another, I hope these creators online continue to play in your face as they make you look like clowns and profit off of you. You deserve better content and content creators in your community. A lot of gacha games have tons of small creators that are really passionate about aspects of the game, which is why I've tried to highlight certain creators here. So go out and find channels like that instead of the loudest and dumbest idiots that could care less about your hobbies. If you want the tribalism to end and the gacha community to stop speedrunning itself into a toxic wasteland, you have to be the first thing to change about it, and hopefully everyone else will follow. But with that, I have nothing else to say, so thank you guys so much for watching, and special thanks to all my channel members. I love you all so much and you mean the world to me. This isn't my regular type of content. I'm normally a Genshin TC, so I won't do the whole like, subscribe and comment spiel here. So I'll be seeing you guys on the flip side. Peace.